Well, maybe we'll get started because we've got a little bit of an introduction, and that'll allow other people that are still coming in to comment in. So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Saskatchewan Mining Week. And welcome to our webinar with the Mining Industry Human Resource Council on their most recent research, The Changing Nature of Work, Innovation, Automation in Canada's Mining Workforce. My name is Pam Schwan, and I'm president of the Saskatchewan Mining Association. We've had the good fortune to work with MiHR on a number of occasions on various labour market projects over the past decade, Ryan, it's been, and we are very pleased to have them with us today to provide highlights of their most recent research. So a special welcome to Ryan Montpellier, Executive Director from MiHR. You want to give a little wave there, Ryan. Aaron Mills, Director of HR Research and Labour Market Intelligence, and Jamie Walcott, Chief Labour Market Economist with MiHR. I'd also like to welcome our partners in hosting this webinar, members of SIMSA, IMII, the Sask Chamber of Commerce Labour Market Committee, and various educational institutions and high school guidance counselors whose programs are going to be influenced by the work that you're doing. We've got over 40 people on the webinar today, so I'd like to thank everybody for joining us on that as well. Before I turn the microphone over to Ryan, I just want to make a few housekeeping announcements that in our virtual world. Everybody's microphone has been automatically muted as they came in to keep background noises to a minimum. We're going to ask everyone to turn off their video camera function so that the presenters are featured. Questions are welcome, but we're going to just use the chat function on the Teams webinar button. So try not to use the raise hand function, use the chat function, and Ryan is going to moderate the questions at the appropriate time in the presentation. And also I want to let you know that we are recording this and we will have it available for posting later. So Ryan, I'm going to turn the presentation over to you now.
Sounds good. So thank you very much, Pam. I'm just going to start sharing my screen here. So yeah, hopefully everyone can see me and can hear me okay. And thank you to the Saskatchewan Mining Association for the invitation. And you know, we're very pleased to be taking part in Mining Week here in Saskatchewan. And very pleased to be sharing this report with you. We, after a sort of 2.5-year study on this topic of the changing nature of work in mining, we launched this report last week, and this is our second sort of showcase of this report. So if you were on the call or on the webinar last week, some of this may be somewhat repetitive. So hopefully you were not, and this will all be the first time you hear about it. So with that, before I get things started, I did want to just mention the fact that this research obviously does not take into consideration the impact of COVID-19 on the Canadian mining workforce. And obviously the pandemic is having a major impact, and we will, over the course of the next, well, over the summer and over the fall, be producing labor market information to identify and highlight the impact it has had on the workforce, on the labor market, on the supply of students coming in to mining related occupations. So expect more in the coming months on that, but for the purposes of this webinar, you know, that was not, you know, obviously factored into the analysis. So the plan for the presentation, I'll provide a brief overview of the Mining Industry Human Resources Council, and also talk a little bit about this report itself and why we you know, what our primary objectives were, and then I'll pass things over to Aaron and Jamie. And both Aaron and Jamie are the primary authors, along with their teams, of this research, and they'll walk you through both the qualitative and quantitative research that went into this. In the interest of time, I won't read through their bios, but you know, please feel free to you know, visit our website, and all of our bios are available there if you'd like more information on myself or on Jamie or Aaron as well. And as Pam mentioned, at the end of the presentation, I'll come back for a brief conclusion, and then try to facilitate a Q&A. And if you do have questions along the way, please use that chat function, and we'll try to read through some of those questions as we get going. So with that, maybe just a little bit about MiHR. We are an independent nonprofit organization with a mandate to help build an inclusive, skilled, and sustainable Canadian mining workforce that adapts to volatility and innovation. We've been around since 1996, so almost 25 years now, really with this concept of leading collaboration across the industry with a number of different stakeholders to try to better understand the labor market, identify opportunities, and develop solutions to them. One of the key strengths of the organization is a network of over 200 industry volunteers that from all facets of the industry that currently serve on one of MiHR's advisory bodies, steering committees, standing committees, industry consortiums that help guide and direct the activities of the council. MiHR's board of directors is a cross-section of those stakeholder groups, and you can see from that we have a number of different employer organizations that represent different commodities, different geographies across the country. But it's not just about mining companies. We also bring in organized labor, post-secondary educational institutions, industry associations, consultants and contractors and others, all of us working together to try to fulfill that mission of building a more sustainable and skilled Canadian mining workforce. So last year, MiHR launched a new strategic plan, which outlined 4 key pillars. And contained in those pillars are a number of programs that address training, skills development, national standards, worker certification and worker mobility, specific tools to help build a more inclusive and diverse workforce. We have a number of tools, and I'd be remiss if I didn't highlight the fact that in Saskatchewan, we do have a program underway in partnership with IMII, and I saw Al earlier on the call as well, specifically to address systemic barriers in place at attracting, recruiting, and retaining women in the sector. So through our gender equity and mining program, we're rolling that out with 10 employers here in Saskatchewan to try to build a more inclusive workplace. So just again, a number of examples of the type of work that we do to try to address these labor market challenges. Today, unfortunately, I won't have time to go through all of these programs that we have, but I did want to highlight just 2, well, 3, because I already highlighted GEM, so 2 more. One is our Gearing Up program, and the Gearing Up program is all about trying to create more co-op opportunities for students studying in the mining industry. So to date, we have funded and provided funding to over 500 organizations, or for 500 students that have found employment in mining organizations. And our goal this year is to produce or to help fund 500 more. So if you are thinking of hiring a co-op student, please do, and please reach out to MiHR, because with we have the ability, and through the Government of Canada and through an agreement with us, we have the ability to help support you in those hirings. And really today, I'd say especially this year, given the challenges that students are facing in finding employment, if you can hire a student, we can help subsidize the cost of that to the tune of almost $7,500. So if you want more information on that, please reach out or visit our website at mihr.ca. And for any employer considering that, we would certainly encourage you to do that. The other program I wanted to briefly highlight was our labor market information program. And really, LMI is the foundation on which all of our programming is built. And having a solid understanding of the demand for mining occupations, and also where those potential sources of labor supply come from, is foundational to the work that we do at the council. And we've produced labor market information studies and reports. We do one every year at the national level called our Mining HR Outlook. We also do some specifically to subsectors of our industry. So with the Prospectors and Developers Association of Canada, the PDAC, we do a mineral exploration HR outlook. But we also do a lot of provincial and territorial work, and we've done some work with PAM and the Saskatchewan Mining Association several times now, but we've also done it in a number of other provinces and territories with colleges and universities, sometimes with mining employers directly. So my ask, or the message I want to leave you with is, if you want more understanding about the local labor markets in which you operate, please feel free to reach out to us, and we'd be happy to talk with you and explore how we can help you in better understanding that labor market research. And that was the segue I wanted to use to bring us to this study. And the changing nature of work was a study that started a few years ago and was extremely important for us as an organization to better understand how technology was impacting the people in our industry. Now, technology is rapidly transforming how we find, how we build, and how we operate mines in Canada. And mining has always been innovative. And today, mining, we are accessing deeper, narrower, more complex, and more remote deposits than ever before. And technology is playing a big role in that. And there's tremendous benefits to these technologies through, we'll go through some of them, but whether it's autonomous vehicles or AI or drone technology or blockchain, we're seeing some very distinct and quantifiable benefits in reducing costs, improving productivity, improving health and safety, reducing greenhouse gas emissions. All of those benefits are quite clear. What is less clear is the impact that these technologies are going to have on the workforce. And that's really at the core of what we wanted to find out. And through this process, we were able to consult with over 120 different people from our sector. We held interviews and focus groups and face-to-face meetings with people across the country, including in Saskatchewan from BHP, Mosaic, Cameco, Nutrien, and the University of Saskatchewan, and a number of other stakeholders from across the country as well that helped feed into this report. So when we started, we really had 4 overriding questions that we set out to try to answer, and those were, what new technologies are currently being introduced in the sector, who will be most disrupted by these new technologies, so who is most vulnerable to being displaced. Third was, what skill requirements are going to change as a result, and how are those skills, what are the skills needed for the mine of the future? And ultimately, how can we as stakeholders better prepare for these changes and better anticipate when those changes are coming? So that was our mission when we started this report. And now I will turn things over to Aaron, who will walk us through some of the qualitative research that came out from our consultations.
Just going to unmute myself. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for, or good afternoon. It's early afternoon for you, late afternoon for us here in Ottawa. It's a sunny day, and that's beautiful. I just want to say thank you very much for joining us today. And echoing Ryan, we are very excited to release this report. It's been a long time coming, and there was a tremendous amount of effort made through MiHR, the LMI team, and by our stakeholders. Tons of research. When we started the process, we thought, we do a lot of research studies, obviously, and we thought it was a little bit easier, not easier, but a fairly straightforward process. And as we got into the research in more detail, we realized that this was a very big and very daunting topic with a lot of different tentacles going in a lot of different directions. And it was pretty exciting, and we learned an awful lot, and there was a lot of different surprises along the way. I'm going to just talk really quickly about the qualitative research, and Jamie will focus on the quantitative research. But as you can see, this slide, this really just gives you an overview of what Brian just mentioned in terms of our methodology, the qualitative methodology, not the quantitative methodology. We did conduct interviews with over 125 Canadian mining stakeholders with direct and relevant knowledge of the Canadian mining industry. And this was accomplished through detailed interviews, which I'm going to tell you a little bit about the perspectives of our stakeholders, the focus group, the online survey, and we also conducted case studies. We also did an extensive lit review into the study, and so I'm just going to like to share some findings with you. And I'd like to also say thank you very much to anyone who participated in our research. Your insight was invaluable. So just some key findings from the literature. As you know, the literature is vast. It's rapidly transforming. We did conduct a literature review over 2 years ago, so we recognize that there are a lot of new studies out there. I just wanted to talk a little bit about how we define new technologies. We've been asked that question quite a few times because it does vary from report to report. So to clarify, new technologies in this study are defined as any new and or emerging technological innovation intended to increase mining efficiency and effectiveness, and in relation to impacting skills requirements, workers, and communities. So that's our definition that we adhered to throughout the study. In the report, it's a large report. We hope that you visit our website and download the report and read it. All of our citations are listed there. Just to highlight what a few of the things that we noted from the literature, that there's a wide range. Sorry, Ryan, I'll just go back to the last slide. My little thing, sorry. The joys of working at home. Just a couple things about the literature review. There's a lot of technologies being adopted. And we didn't survey mining stakeholders on what they were using per se and get into the technicalities of it. Talk about how they're adopting it, if they're planning on adopting it, some of the views in terms of the challenges and opportunities. And things that were noted were autonomous vehicles, AI, drones, electric vehicles, data analytics, sensors, VR, tons of stuff was noted. One thing I think is really important to highlight before we go too far is that the pace of adoption, well recognized in the literature, was that the pace of adoption will be slow and uneven. So it's not an overnight transformation, and companies will implement things and adopt things in a mixed manner. And again, implementation is influenced by fiscal realities, unionization, the availability of technologies, et cetera. Some job loss will occur, but a lot of new jobs are going to be created as a result. So for example, data analytics and new forms of maintenance we're going to see. So I just want to share a few perspectives from our mining stakeholders, which I think are really important. We asked mining stakeholders through some interviews a number of key questions. You know, how are they changing the nature of work? How will it improve worker health and safety? Will it affect the number of people working in mining? Which occupations will be affected? How will it affect the employment of local or Indigenous groups? Will new technologies increase the level of interest and retention of women and immigrants in mining-related careers? And what we heard could be captured, as the slide suggests, could be captured around two themes. And I'm going to focus on the first theme just for a moment, the changing nature of work in mining. Work is changing. We're seeing that there's strong incentives to implement these new technologies. As Ryan mentioned, there's worker health and safety, increased productivity, cost reductions, competitiveness, strengthened environmental sustainability. But we did hear a lot of mixed views on job loss and gains. Some people noted that, oh, there's going to be lots of job loss. Some noted that there's going to be some gains, but in all, most jobs will be affected. We also heard that there's going to be opportunities and challenges. No doubt there's going to be some groups that are adversely affected. Other groups are going to be positively affected. But we're not sure to what extent this is going to take place. And again, the rate of adoption is mixed. So these came from these are from the mining stakeholder interviews. So this is echoing the literature, as I mentioned before. But again, these are from the stakeholder perspectives. So I just want to share with you on the next slide a few of the quotes. There's a lot. We did a lot of interviews, and there's a lot of quotes from people. Just to exemplify what was said to us. You know, stakeholders are incredibly interested in this topic. We had a lot of support, and it was very encouraging. But we heard a lot about technology being a cost saver, a health and safety issue, monitoring issue, better use of information issue, and a performance issue. Again, technologies will not provoke a reduction in the workforce necessarily, but a fundamental change. There is a huge risk of miscommunication when a new technology is adopted, and there needs to be buy-in from employees for successful implementation. And leveraging these technologies could increase the number of well-educated and skilled people interested in mining work. So it will increase access to mining opportunities. So just to talk about a little bit about the second theme that we noted, you know, obviously themes emerge from the qualitative data, and we organize these around the two key themes. The second theme was increasing skills requirements. When we asked, will new technologies shift skill requirements? How? Which skills will be in most demand? How should mining companies prepare employees with the skills needed for the jobs of tomorrow? What about post-secondary education? Are graduates prepared to work in mining? If not, how can post-secondary institutions better prepare students? And what we heard was, no surprise, that lifelong learning and training is key. Flexibility and adaptable workers are what's necessary. And that new technologies, again, may increase access to employment for some folks, for some workers, and may negatively impact others. We heard a lot about gamification of mining and the ability to work off-site, and the fact that it would attract younger, more technically savvy and diverse workers. And also the need for both soft skills and technical skills. So these are just to exemplify some of the quotes that we heard on the next slide. Sorry, my notes here. Again, just to illustrate our stakeholder perceptions, understanding and working with new technologies will require skills to evolve. New roles will be created. Innovative changes are good for diversity. It broadens the approach to diversified talent and allows us to attract new people with new skills and open up the workforce. We need curious people wanting to learn, to maintain and grow their knowledge and embrace innovative and new technologies. Now, I'm not sure if the slides cut off on your end, but the last, we just wanted to note here that these findings were raised repeatedly through the interviews. We did note some reluctance and resistance from both employers and employees. Change is indeed difficult and uncertain. But most of the interviews talked about the fact that perceptions were mixed. They weren't really sure. People weren't really sure what was happening because all of these changes are happening rapidly and unevenly. And no clear sense of what the future was going to hold was noted. And again, with respect to the Indigenous communities, what we did hear was that it will present some challenges for Indigenous communities, but present opportunities in other areas. So just the last slide that I wanted to highlight on is the case studies. We did conduct 3 case studies in 2019, 2 Canadian mine sites and 1 training facility. And we wanted to support our understanding of how technology is impacting Canadian mining work. So we visited Quebec, Newfoundland, and Ontario, and we wanted to explore how companies are using these new technologies to improve work efficiencies and training practices. So the 3, and one, I wanted to shout out a big thank you to the companies that participated. We had Agnico Eagle, Anaconda, and Norcat. Some of the highlights from the case studies was Agnico Eagle's piloting of autonomous vehicles and underground and related training for control room operators. Anaconda's implementation of sustainable mining by drilling and development of the Anaconda University Training Platform, and Norcat's Advanced Simulation Training Center, where operators can sit in the driver's seat of various mining machines in order to be trained efficiently and economically. And lastly, using these findings, we were able to inform and guide the next phase of the research. And Jamie's going to talk a lot about this now, the quantitative research. And this was to answer our main research questions. Who will be vulnerable to technological disruption and what skills are going to be required in the future? So I'll pass it over to Jamie. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Erin. Okay, just making sure that my screen is presenting. Okay, looks like it's good. So first, I want to thank everyone for their interest in this presentation, and I'm excited to share this, the quantitative side of the research that we have done. So as Ryan had mentioned, this topic has been on our radar for several years now. And we have noticed there are several existing contributions out there that are all excellent. But today I'm going to share with you our take, and you'll see our thought process on this and what we've done with this topic. So while innovation and technology will be the central theme, eventually, we always come back to the impact on workers and the labor market. So to do this, we're looking at 2 main ideas, and those are first, what we're calling occupational vulnerability. So who will potentially face the greatest impact? And the second idea is how emerging technologies may shift future workforce skills. So those are the 2 agenda items for this presentation. And here we go. So starting with occupational vulnerability. So this section is an occupational analysis. So we're interested in which occupations are most exposed to the downside risks of innovation. So in other words, we're asking who may be vulnerable, and then we're diving into why that may be true. We are hopeful that this information can be used to make informed decisions. Then that may include strategies to mitigate the risks for those who are vulnerable. So again, the objective here is to identify where we should focus our attention and resources so that we can ultimately develop a stronger labor market. Okay, so I think everyone is clear on the upsides of innovation, whether that's health and safety, environmental benefits, or say cost reduction. The downsides, on the other hand, are more ambiguous. So, for example, we are still unclear on the extent of disruption. In other words, how far will new technology eventually go? We're also unsure of the pace of technological disruption. So a new technology might exist today, but that doesn't necessarily guarantee that it will be immediately adopted or integrated into an operation. The example we like to pick on is self-driving cars. So these have existed for several years now, and we all think of this as potentially disruptive, but we are a little less certain on the extent of this change. So that is, how many jobs will be lost? Which jobs will be lost? You know, in that case, is it a driver? Is it a mechanic? We're also unsure about how quickly this will unfold. So is it 5 years? Is it 10 years? So if we are concerned with vulnerability, then timing is going to be important. So if in other words, if I have a few decades to plan for my job to be replaced, then am I really being disrupted? We think of several examples of that going through in the past. So there are also several other external factors that are at play that determine whether a new technology will be disruptive or not. So whether it's feasible, whether it has a high capital expenditure, whether prices and markets will make it an attractive option for operation or mining project. So what is the challenge then? So these uncertainties present us with essentially a challenge in answering our primary question that I had mentioned. So that is, who is vulnerable and why? They also make it difficult for people to navigate the labor markets. So workers need to know what skills might be marketable, not just now, but in the future. And employers want to understand their labor market and if it can sustain their operational needs. So that's the challenge. How do we address this challenge? So our team has developed labor market information, or LMI, which is another way of saying we want to use data to measure this problem. So we do that by looking at several indicators, and these are going to give us clues regarding which occupations face the greatest risks. So after we've amassed a few indicators, what we've done is we've aggregated them into a composite score that's going to gauge occupational vulnerability. So essentially, we want to pack the information into one number, and we want to have that number be provide a signal for vulnerability. There's other well-known examples of an index that combines several variables, such as the one I'm talking about. So this may include the S&P 500, the CPI, and the Human Development Index, among others. And we're sticking to that idea, so we're introducing MiHR's Occupational Vulnerability Index, or MOVI. So the idea behind the MOVI is to provide a flag or a signal of the workers who are found to have the most exposure to the downside risks of innovation. So later in this presentation, we'll want to understand how occupations are uniquely vulnerable as well. Okay. Okay, so what makes an occupation vulnerable? So our framework examines two main criteria. Those are shown in blue. So the first one we call technological disruption. So in other words, is the robot coming for my job? The second one is worker adaptability. So in the event that I am disrupted, am I able to stay on my feet? So to get closer to answering these questions, we start to characterize certain sub-themes. So under technological disruption, we're interested in three main sub-themes. So the first is scope of innovation. So that's saying, is there a technology that is capable of doing my job currently or in the foreseeable future? The second one is incentives for disruption. So is there an incentive for an organization to bring in job replacement technologies? So this could include economic, environmental, or safety incentives, among others. And then finally, we're looking at social and regulatory obligations. So are there any hurdles that must be cleared before job replacing technologies can be adopted? So under worker adaptability, here we are interested in two sub-themes. The first being transferability of skills. So do my skills overlap with other roles in the economy? And then the second one we're calling geographic labor mobility. So this is talking about the ability to move closer to alternative employment. So together, these factors are going to push and pull on an occupation's vulnerability. And we can insert any occupation into this model. For example, if we think about truck drivers, and that's the one we always pick on. Let me run through that. So are there technologies that could replace a truck driver? Is there an incentive to adopt these technologies? Are there social and regulatory barriers? Do truck drivers have a skill set that translate to other job opportunities? And finally, are truck drivers limited to certain geographies? So we did this exercise for 120 occupations, and this is our list of occupations that we have deemed relevant to the mining industry. And we use this as a we use this framework as a roadmap for gathering data. And I'm going to show that in the next slide. So obviously I won't have time to go through all of this today, and all of this information can be found in the report. But what we've done here is we've gathered key variables and indicators that characterize our themes. Then to build a composite score, we considered several methods. Ultimately, though, we followed the OECD handbook for building composite indicators. I also want to note that this can be built on in future iterations as we evolve and perhaps get better data. So in many ways, this is a pilot, and we're looking to improve upon this foundation. So we use this framework for 120 mining relevant occupations. Again, these occupations include everything from underground miner to mechanic to engineer to labor to geologist. And throughout that, we produced 120 MOVI scores. So a MOVI score will range from 0 to 1, with 1 being the most vulnerable, 0 being the least. And a MOVI score will be a combination of all these ingredients compiled into one number. So let me get to the outcomes. So this is what they look like in a histogram. So we can see that it has a fairly even, nice distribution. And at this point, we want to know, what is a bad MOVI score? So if I told you you had a MOVI score of 0.67, should you be concerned? So just like other indices, the only way to interpret this is in comparison to other scores. So here's our takeaways from this, from just putting this on a slide here. So the average MOVI the average occupation has a MOVI score of 0.44. The middle 50% of occupations, that's in the blue segment there, is between 0.32 and 0.54. So if you're above that level, you're in the top 25%. We're going to say you're relatively high. If you're below that level, you're relatively low. So now we have a way of knowing which occupations may have a high MOVI. Now what we want to know is how many people are in those occupations. So here is the distribution of MOVI scores for mining and quarrying. That's roughly 70,000 workers in that sector. So the typical mining occupation, again, has on average 0.44. The typical mining worker, on the other hand, has a MOVI score of 0.57. And we can see that that distribution is skewed to the right as there are several mining workers in occupations with high MOVI scores. Another way to visualize this is in this picture. So each point corresponds to an occupation. On the vertical axis there, we have the MOVI scores. So the more vulnerable occupations are going to be higher in the graph. And the horizontal axis is showing the size of the mining workforce in that occupation. So as we move up and to the right, we say that there's a higher exposure for the mining workforce. So these are pointing to the areas of concern. So for example, we have the highest MOVI score is underground miners, and that's at 0.75. And this occupation has not only has the highest MOVI score, but also has the largest contingent of workers in the mining and quarrying sector. So that's going to give us a signal that maybe we want to pay attention to this occupation. So here we have this exact same graph as in the previous slide. but we have organized the 120 occupations into broad categories. And we can see here that production occupations are in the upper right danger zone area. In contrast, we see the least exposed occupations are in physical sciences and HR and financial occupations. So in this picture, we swapped out the horizontal axis. So instead of the workforce size, now we have the share of Indigenous workers. And we can see, and so, you know, this demonstrates we can play on this demographically and show for different demographic groups what their MOVI scores may be. This is an example of that. And we can see here there is some exposure up in the, as you move higher in the graph, meaning that there are a few occupations that have both a high MOVI and a large share of Indigenous workers. So up until now, I've presented the MOVI as a one number. We acknowledge that this can't tell us everything, so the MOVI is only a rough indicator. So that means that we could have two occupations with the same MOVI, but for very different reasons. So we would like to unpack this a little bit. So in order to do that, we lean on this visualization called a spider chart. So this is going to show the different ingredients of the MOVI and how they may be contributing factors. So again, this gives us a way to uniquely identify why an occupation is vulnerable so that we may have the right antidote and we may make informed decisions. So these charts align with our framework, MOVI, or MOVI framework that I presented. So the MOVI score is at the top at 12 o'clock. And then going clockwise are the sub-themes that I had described earlier. The greater area correlates with a greater exposure to a disruption from technologies, from our MOVI framework. We also see a comparative reference for the average MOVI in all occupations and for the specific broad occupational category that occupation may be in. So here I've provided three examples. So the largest MOVI is on the left, that's underground miners. The smallest MOVI is in the middle, that's industrial engineering technicians. And on the right is construction millwrights. And I added that one because it illustrates how we might use this information. We see that millwrights have a relatively average size MOVI, but job transferability of skills is not really a contributing factor in this case. So if we were thinking about mitigating exposure for millwrights, then maybe transferability of skills is not going to be the most effective route in that certain case. So you can see how every MOVI has a unique flavor of what makes them vulnerable, and we may want to consider those things as we navigate the potential solutions. So that concludes the MOVI. The second stage is to look at future workforce skills. So while the previous section was very much an occupational analysis, this section is going to look at skills. And I want to first, before I begin, acknowledge that skills are rather abstract. There is no commonly accepted definition or measurement of skills. So for our purpose here, we leveraged the ONET database, which is a data set produced by the US Department of Labor. So they have defined 35 basic skills that are used in several occupations. So we first converted this data for Canadian occupations, and then we use this to provide a measurement of skills, which I will go over. So again, our objective here is to have some kind of observation of the skills that are being used in the mining industry currently. And then from there, we want to investigate how this might be different considering emerging innovation and technologies. So to do this, we developed a rather straightforward analysis, which I'll go over. I first want to acknowledge a few limitations in this analysis. So while the focus is on skills, the analysis necessarily leverages occupational data. So that data is obviously going to be limited to the occupations that exist today. So we can't crawl in to occupations that don't exist yet. We have no data for that. Next, the analysis does not predict the future production mix. So if we think of the production mix as the combination of labor and capital, that being things like trucks, buildings, machines, then this analysis doesn't develop any forecast of this in any way. Rather, we're developing a few scenarios, which I'll get into. Lastly, this analysis does not rank any skills in any way. So for example, we are not going to say that a manager uses leadership 50% of the time, or that leadership is the most valuable skill. So rather, we're asking whether a manager uses leadership, yes or no. And just as a final point that I want to make, I want to mention that this analysis is not about predicting the future. Rather, it is intended as a diagnostic. And what we're looking for here is directional change, and we're looking for significance. Before I get into our measurement of skills, I want to show a couple of interesting pictures. So this graph shows the ratio of capital input to labor input in the mining industry since 1980. And we can see that indeed there is a trend of capital intensification that has occurred over that time. And over the same period, we can see a shift in educational attainment. So as the industry was becoming more capital intensive, they've also employed more people with post-secondary education as well. So the point of this is to say that a shift in capital and skills is not unprecedented in this sector. So that leads me back to MiHR's skills analysis. We want to know, we know that mining capital can change, and we know that labor skills can change. So to analyze this further, we followed a rather simple approach. So recall, the idea is to get a baseline scenario of the skills that are currently being used in the industry. So in order to do this, step one is to attribute skills to occupations. So we created a mapping of skills to occupations. As I had mentioned before, we had leveraged the ONET database for this task. And we say that if a skill exceeds a certain threshold for both importance and level, so those are ONET definitions, if we exceed those thresholds, then it belongs to that occupation. So again, we're only interested in the binary result. So does an occupation use a skill, yes or no? The second step here is to aggregate all of the workers using that particular skill across all occupations. So let me provide an analogy of this approach. So we like to think of a skill as a tool, such as a wrench or a screwdriver, and an occupation as a collection of tools, like a toolbox. So our approach basically attributes tools to certain toolboxes. So in this case, you can see skill 1 goes to occupation A. It happens not to go into into occupation B. And then we add up all the workers using skill 1. So for example, if we know that an engineer has skill 1 in their toolbox, and we know how many engineers there are, then we have a partial estimate for how many workers are using skill 1. And then from there, we're going to aggregate across all occupations for a total estimate. So that's our approach. We did this for two scenarios. One is assuming no technological change. So we call this the baseline scenario. The other scenario is going to assume both the skills in the toolboxes will change and the number of workers with those skills will change. That's what we call the innovation scenario. And to build this scenario, we relied heavily on our qualitative analysis and information that we've gathered from other various sources. And that has really helped us develop this innovation scenario. And like I said, these scenarios represent two extremes. And the thing I wanted to point out was that what I mentioned earlier was that the point of this, the objective, is to point to the direction or potential magnitude of shifting skills stemming from the changes in assumptions that we've made. I just wanted to quickly point out to the ONET skills that were used in this case, in case you were curious about that. So there's 35 of them. These are the 10 that we have chosen for the purpose of this analysis. And here's our results. So the baseline scenario is shown as the black line and circle, and the innovation scenario is the yellow columns. And we can see the directional change for each skill. So a couple of observations out of this. First, the majority of the selected skills are anticipated to increase under the innovation scenario, notably judgment and decision-making, reading comprehension, problem solving, and active learning. Critical thinking continues to be the most widely used skill, with close to 90% of the mining workforce requiring this skill in their skill set. A couple of exceptions are going to include operation and control and operations monitoring. And these are expected to decrease, yet at the same time are expected to remain fairly prevalent with close to 60% of the workforce. Programming, interestingly enough, remains to be the least commonly used skill among the mining and quarrying workforce, even as it is expected to be used in slightly larger number of occupations. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I clicked ahead too far. Let me go back. So I just wanted to summarize this. So in this analysis here on skills, we offer a simple approach for quantifying skills that are being used within Canada's mining workforce. We're acknowledging certain limitations in quantifying workforce skills, and we're providing an initial reference for comparing how various skills are represented and how they may evolve as new technologies are introduced. So the goal here is that career seekers, employers, educators are able to align these labor supply skill sets with those that are predicted to be in flux here. So that concludes my section, and I want to turn it over to Ryan to provide concluding remarks, and then maybe turn it over to questions. Thank you.
So thanks, Jamie. So just a few slides here, just to sum things up. We know that some of these technologies are already here. They're coming. I think it's safe to say mining has always been innovative, but we are on what many people believed in that qualitative research, on the cusp of a bit of a technological revolution in the mining industry. And we know that some of this technology will have a really positive effect on the workforce. It's going to allow for more flexible work practices. I think we're seeing COVID-19 already thrusting us into this world, especially for a lot of the office work that is taking place. We're seeing technology significantly contribute to increased productivity, increased health and safety, reducing costs, and so on and so forth. Our challenge in this was trying to understand and better prepare for understanding who's going to be at risk and how can we help individuals and organizations make more informed decisions on how to appropriately staff, operate, train for the mine of the future. And this analysis was a first step in that direction for us. One thing that became very clear was that continued skills development, lifelong learning, soft skills came up again and again as important. Having a workforce that was able to manage that change was extremely important to the changing nature of work and where the industry was heading. Just as a last point before we open it up to the next slide, Jamie, if you can just switch it forward. As Jamie identified, this was our first kick at the can in terms of better understanding the future of work in Canada, but it's not the last step. We want to continue to explore this and also help this understanding better inform our forecasting. As I mentioned at the outset, we forecast both hiring requirements and talent availability in the mining sector, and that helps both industry and post-secondary education and career seekers better align supply and demand. And understanding how technology has a role to play in that is something that we want to continue to explore. Also looking at how other countries are doing this, and we've done a lot of consultations with Australia, and we had a presentation with the government of Australia earlier this year to talk about their approach to looking at occupational vulnerability and displacement in the future of work. So we're going to continue those dialogues and continue to collaborate with other sectors on building a skilled and capable workforce. So with that, that's the end of our presentation. I did want to go to the meeting chat that I see. There were some questions that were asked along the way. The first one was, will the presentation be available after the fact? And the answer is yes. We will either, Pam from the SMA can circulate that, or we will, upload a PDF. I believe this is being recorded and will be on the YouTube channel. So if you do want to go back to it, please feel free. We also have a YouTube or a video of our original launch as well last week that will be on our website as well. Somebody was also asking about just the Microsoft Teams banner at the bottom blocking some of the slides. So I think having a full PDF version of this, anything that was cut off, you'll be able to see the full slide. Looking at the question, I'm not seeing any other questions about the presentation per se. If there are some, please feel free to type them on the meeting chat, or if you'd like to, unmute your mic and ask the question. I believe we have 3 or 4 minutes here before I'll turn things over to Pam. Maybe without seeing one here, one thing that did come up in the last webinar that we had last week, one of the questions was the impact that technology is going to have on building a more inclusive and diverse workforce. And we see this, and through the consultation, and Aaron, feel free to jump in here if you'd like, but that these new technologies has the potential to really open up the the industry to a number of to help build a more inclusive workplace. As work becomes more remote and people can start doing some of this work from their home or being able to do it from larger urban centers, I think we will see a diversification of our industry. That being said, moving some of these occupations outside of communities does pose risks as well. And I think for many years we've always said that we can't move an ore body and we can't offshore mining jobs. Well, with some of these technologies, I think there is a risk there that some of these occupations can be moved sort of outside of the mine site and ultimately outside of the communities in which mines operate. And that does have the risk of potentially, changing the fundamental relationship between mining companies and the communities in which they operate. And employment always had a big role to play in that, and that the benefits of having a mining in your community was always about providing good, well-paying jobs. And if that's going to erode with some of these new technologies, I do think there's a risk there around social license to operate and making sure that mining communities have a solid understanding of that relationship going forward. I see a few questions that have come up here. So briefly, Pam saying there are 120 occupations. How did you decide which ones we're going to do the skills mapping for? Jamie referenced 35 groups. Mir looked at 10. How does the 35 different groups correlate to the 120 occupations?
Okay. Yeah, so getting a little feedback. So there are 120 occupations that we have mainly focused on in our work, and what we've done is we've done an exhaustive review of our occupations list. And I remember at one point it was like 60, and what we've done is we ordered a whole bunch of data on occupations and saw which ones were lighting up when you filter over the mining industry onto it, and not just the mining industry but different sectors. And from there we did this painstakingly reviewed and chose 120 occupations that we felt, based on our criteria, were important to the mining industry in some way. And some of those occupations are, rather ubiquitous, like an accountant or whatever. But it was enough of a critical point that it was important to the industry. I would refer anyone to our national report if you're interested in what some of those are. I'm not sure if, actually, to be honest with you, I'm not sure. No, this report. I think this report will have that information. So that's how we chose. We went with all of them, the ones that we have done. That was done before this study on innovation. So then when I referenced 35 groups, I was referring to skills, 35 skills definitions from the ONET database. So again, the ONET database is a data set from the U.S. Department of Labor, and you can go on their website and see what they're about. And they've sort of sliced and diced a lot of different functions and roles in the economy, including skills and aptitudes, and they've really built a framework for defining some of this stuff. We picked their skills. We could have picked other things, but we picked, so they have 35 of them. I showed 10 of them. The reason why we did 10 was because, again, we were piloting this work. Those 10 were carefully chosen and were chosen based on our quantitative research. And we didn't do all 35 because that was going to blow up our scope for this pilot. But we said, let's start with these 10. These were the ones we were kept hearing in interviews and stuff that were very important. So let's try it with this, and then we move forward with that. So those skills are skill groups, occupations. So then what we did to move forward with this is we had to make a mapping of those 120 of those 35 skills for each occupation. So pick one skill and say, does this skill belong to that occupation? And we made a whole giant map of this, a whole bunch of yes or no's. And that's how all this sort of plays together. I hope that was clear.
Thanks, Jamie. I see us bumping up on time here. I did want to address one more question that came up, and one of the answers that came up as well. So Pam asked, any idea on what you see as changes in the K-12 system for shifting skills? And Janet answered here, continue to develop and teach the skills that we're talking about for youth. Continue to introduce coding and robotics from K-12 to have young people excited about creating a technology culture in the province. Could not agree more. That is sort of bang on, Janet. What I will say is overwhelmingly what we've heard from mining companies is you need the technological side, you need the high-tech skills, but not necessarily at the expense of the softer skills or the people skills, where communication, teamwork, problem solving, continuous learning, those types of skills were highlighted as being increasingly important in an ever complex, changing and world of mining that needed some people to adapt and change. So I think it's continuing to balance both of those, both technical skills and soft skills. And with that, I see us right up at our time here at 4 o'clock Eastern time, so 2 o'clock for all of you. And Pam, I think I'm going to turn this back over to you for some closing remarks here.
Sure, thanks, Ryan and Aaron and Jamie. It's my second time I've listened to it, and it's very fascinating. It has my mind thinking about lots of different things, but I think it was really appropriate that we use technology for this virtual presentation, because it's certainly online and on message with how the sector is going to have to adapt its operations to continue improving productivity and safety. So I want to thank you, Ryan, very much for your entire team, including Aaron and Jamie and everybody else that's in the back supporting them as well for the presentation. Certainly look forward to your continuing research on this subject and other things you're going to expand into after this pilot. So thank you very much, and thank you to everybody who joined us today. And we invite everybody to join us for other Saskatchewan Mining Week activities as well. So stay safe, stay strong, and stay connected. Thanks again, Ryan.
Thank you. Bye-bye.